The 2025 elections were a complete victory for Democrats and democracy. From New Jersey to Virginia, from New York City to Georgia and Mississippi, Democrats swept the country in critical elections. In California and Maine, pro-democracy forces won important ballot measures protecting redistricting and opposing voter ID. But look, my job is not to celebrate or to sugarcoat. It is to warn about what to expect next from Donald Trump and how we can fight back. In this video, I explain what Donald Trump and Republicans are up to and what they will do next. I list the 8 specific steps we can expect from them in 2026. And by the end, I'll explain what we can all do to stand up and fight back. But before we get into it, subscribe to this channel to stay informed about how you can defend democracy. I've been practicing election law for 35 years. And during that time, I have seen some really good nights. 2008, I'll never forget. When Barack Obama stepped out and declared victory. 2006 were amazing midterms. But we've also had bad nights. And, look, in 2016, I was the general counsel to Hillary Clinton's campaign, and I could literally feel the campaign shaking as it came to the realization that we were headed towards defeat. 2024 was a bad election night. And let me tell you, the 2025 election night, even though it only involved non-federal elections and a handful of states, it was a very good night. It was a very good night for Democrats, and it was a really important night for democracy. To put it bluntly, Democrats won everything, everywhere, all at once. They captured 2 governorships in New Jersey and in Virginia by wide margins. They won statewide elections in Georgia. They flipped 13 seats in the Virginia House of Delegates. In Pennsylvania, where 3 Democratic state Supreme Court justices were facing retention elections, all 3 Democratic justices won easily, going away. So that court will remain 5-2. I could go on and on. New York City, obviously, Zoran Mondani won. And one of the things out of New York that I have not seen commented upon is the Republican candidate got less than 10% of the vote. There's barely a Republican Party left in the city of New York. In Mississippi, Mississippi of all places, Democrats flipped some state house seats that broke their supermajority in the Mississippi state legislature, which is a huge deal if you believe, as I do, that Mississippi is going to be one of the rising battleground states of the South in the very near future. And all of this is before you get to the big ballot initiatives. In California, where Gavin Newsom and Democrats led an effort to redraw that state's congressional maps, it won in a walk. I mean, it just won in an absolute landslide. And in Maine, where Republicans put voter ID on the ballot, that was defeated by an almost identical margin as to what happened in California. If I had done a video a year ago and told you that in California, Democrats would be sponsoring an initiative to undo the nonpartisan commission maps and replace it with partisan maps, and meanwhile, Republicans would be in purple Maine, because Maine is a purple state, sponsoring a voter ID law, you'd say, well, ID laws are really popular, and there's no way in California they're going to ever vote out their nonpartisan redistricting map. Well, you would have been wrong on both accounts, because the complete opposite happened. And so this was a really good night for democracy, but we also learned a ton. Like, for example, don't believe the pundits when they tell you that voter ID is really popular. Okay? The next time you hear a pundit tell you how popular voter ID is, or Republicans try to spin you that, point them to the results in Maine. Like I said, Maine is a purple state. I mean, it has a Republican senator in Susan Collins. One of the 2 congressional districts voted for Donald Trump. This is not a solidly blue state, and yet they said no to voter ID there. And like I said, in California, which you would have assumed would be very, very defensive of what would be seen as a pro-reform democracy, procedural democracy initiative, they voted overwhelmingly in favor of drawing a new map. And believe me, I waited a couple of days before I did this video because I want to let everyone have an opportunity to soak this in and celebrate and enjoy. We beat ourselves up. over the close election defeats we have, like the one we had in 2024. So we deserve some time to just bask in the good news of a night in which Democrats just won everything, Republicans won nothing, and democracy was on the ballot in a number of places and prevailed. But I think it's also my obligation to you, the Democracy Docket audience, and really it's a Democracy Docket community at this point, to tell it to you straight. And here's the deal. Donald Trump has not given up on the big lie. Donald Trump has not broken with election denialism. Quite to the contrary. He's doubling down on election denialism. And most importantly, Donald Trump has not stopped trying to rig the 2026 election. What we have already seen since Tuesday night's results is Donald Trump making clear he wants to do more of it. And so in this video, what I really want to do is walk you through what I see coming down the road from Donald Trump, what I think Republicans are going to serve up next. And I do it not to create a sense of hopelessness. Quite to the contrary. If you walk away with hopelessness, then you didn't get the message. This is not a hopeless time. I am hopeful. I am optimistic about the future of Democrats winning elections in 2026. I am optimistic about the future of building a new, stronger democracy after Donald Trump. But all of that starts with us being honest about the challenges we face and talking about what he is going to do so that we can expect it and that we can also take steps to counter it. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to lay out 8 things that I expect to be coming from Donald Trump and the Republicans over the course of the next year. Some of them you have already started to see materialize, but they're going to get worse. Others may sound fanciful, but I promise you, before we get to next November in 2026, you're going to see all 8 of these things. So I'm going to go through them in order, not necessarily the most important or the least important, but it's a logical order that makes sense to me, and I hope you will agree. I also hope you will agree to take this opportunity to support Democracy Docket. You know, I started Democracy Docket in 2020 to be a voice for democracy, to be unapologetic and unafraid, to never bow down, to never back away from a fight, and to not be compromised by corporate overlords or billionaire backers. It survives because people like you support it. And so if you can, become a premium member today by clicking on the link in the description of this episode. If you can't afford the $10 a month, become a free subscriber. That link is also in the description below. All right, so the first thing we need to expect and we need to prepare for is that Republicans are going to claim that Tuesday's victory was the product of fraud. I know you're saying, Mark, but how come they haven't already done it? Well, first of all, they sort of have. I mean, the fact is Donald Trump, before the election, claimed that the California election would be the result of fraud. He posted on social media. I wrote about it in Democracy Docket. People who are already subscribers will have read what I wrote, and it was just recounting how he had already, before the election had taken place, said that there was going to be fraud in California. And he used it as another justification to bash mail-in voting and to try to target other forms of voting that he doesn't like. On election day, there were a number of reports that I received of prominent Republicans and conservatives claiming that there was fraud going on election day. We heard these reports in Pennsylvania. We heard these reports in New Jersey. We heard some reports, although less confirmed, in Virginia. So the right-wing disinformation and misinformation machine was running full throttle on election day. What happened is they lost by a huge margin. And so when Donald Trump woke up on the morning following the election, he had a choice. He could either say this was the product of fraud and have to somehow explain how that fraud led his candidates to lose by like 15 points, 17 points, and that was just implausible even for him. And the problem for him is that if he did that, he would have to own some responsibility in the outcome of the election. So he went with option B, which was to just say, yep, these were the results and it wasn't my fault, it was other people's. It was bad candidates in Virginia, bad candidates in New York, bad candidates in New Jersey. And then to just sort of ignore the fact that he, in fact, was what was dragging the Republican brand down. So that's what he went with. So the reason why he didn't claim fraud in the immediate aftermath of the election was only because he made a strategic decision that it would be better for his own brand, better for his ability to keep his Republican Party on a short leash and keep Mike Johnson, the Speaker, and John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, beholden to him, for him to not claim fraud, but rather to say, yeah, the elections went really badly, but it was everyone's fault but my own. But this is the thing, he's not going to be able to do that in 2026, and he knows that. In 2026, the stakes are really high. I mean, Donald Trump probably would prefer a Republican governor in New Jersey and a Republican governor in Virginia, but honestly, it doesn't really affect his life. It does affect his life whether there are more Democrats or more Republicans in the Senate, and it does affect his life who has the gavel, whether it's Speaker Johnson or Speaker Jeffries. So when it comes to 2026, he's not going to have a choice. He's going to have to double down, triple down on the big lie in the same way he did in 2020, in the same way he did in 2022. You see, people forget that he did that in 2022, but I don't forget. And I hope you don't forget. Right? That was the narrative that came out of 2022 when Joe Biden was president and Democrats did better than expected. We had Kerry Lake claiming fraud. Cochise County, Arizona wasn't certifying elections. We had claims of fraud in Pennsylvania. There were counties there not willing to certify elections. Like, we had a lot of that. And so that's what we're going to look for 2026. And I predict that we're not going to get that much further from 2025 before the emergence of a fraud narrative comes out of 2025. Like, in a few weeks, in a month or 2 months, people will forget exactly what the margins were. They'll forget exactly how many seats were picked up here and there. And you'll start to see Donald Trump claim that 2025 we saw fraud. And he's going to use that as a lever, as a jumping off point to argue for more restrictions of voting rights. More restrictions of voting rights in states controlled by Republican governors and legislatures where they can do it by law. More restrictions in voting rights where the Department of Justice, which is entirely under his control, can take action. We're going to see him call for more restrictions in voting rights through executive actions. But the fraud narrative has not ended, right? It's just he has abandoned it tactically, but not strategically in the here and now. Which brings me to the second thing we're going to see, which is that Donald Trump is going to try to ban several popular methods of voting, okay? Several. Not one, not just vote by mail, but also early vote, also using certain voting equipment, also making voter registration more difficult, also trying to institute nationwide photo ID requirements. And all of those things will be targeting Democratic voters to benefit Republicans. Okay, now listen to me here. These are going to be targeting Democratic voters to benefit Republicans. Stop with the nonsense that this may backfire on them. They know which method of voting Democrats use. They know what the pain points are for Republicans. And they are not going to exacerbate the pain points for Republicans. They're only going to target Democrats. That is why you continue to see this obsession with vote by mail. Why? Because Democrats disproportionately use voting by mail. You're going to see the elimination or the restriction on drop boxes. Why? Because Democrats make greater use of drop boxes, and Democratic constituencies require more drop boxes. They're going to target early voting. Why? Because more Democratic voters tend to vote early, right? If you look at the election results, even in New Jersey and Virginia and New York, where the Democrats all won in large margins, if you looked only at election day voting, it's a very different picture. They're going to target these other kinds of voting because they believe it's going to help them win in 2026. It's not more complicated than that. Don't overthink it. There's no jurisprudential argument behind it. There's no big think behind it. There's no policy debate behind it. It is the exercise of pure political power to try to keep control of Congress in 2026. By the way, one of the quickest dying narratives of my entire political career, and I've represented probably thousands of campaigns at this point in my career. I've done hundreds of cases of litigation involving the outcome, things that could affect the outcome of elections. One of the quickest dying narratives was this idea that young voters had swung Republicans, that Latino voters had swung Republican, that even we saw Black voters swinging Republican. It turns out that was all bullshit. Okay, so the voter suppression that is aimed at Black voters and Latino voters and young voters, those are still going to be targeting those populations because those populations vote more for Democrats than for Republicans. This is a point I made in earlier videos. Even in 2024, you might have seen those margins shift to be less, but they were still more Democratic than Republican. And after 2025, that is going to be even more clear as we head towards the midterm. So expect that Donald Trump is going to try to ban several forms of voting and make it harder for people to vote in the 2026 elections. On top of that, not separate from it, but on top of that, Donald Trump and the Republicans will exploit the levers of federal power available to him. Now, we already know what some of those are, right? Deploying the military, using ICE and other federal law enforcement, accessing sensitive voter data information. You know, I've been on a kick about this. You know, this Department of Justice under Pam Bondi is trying to collect personalized, sensitive voter data on everyone watching this video who's a citizen in the United States. In fact, they're trying to collect that sensitive data on every citizen in the United States. They want to know what elections you voted in, what elections you may have skipped, where you voted, did you vote early, did you vote absentee, whether you moved, whether you changed states. I mean, there's a lot of sensitive data, your social security number, your signature, right? Lots of sensitive data, and they want access to all of it. And in fact, they've sued 8 states. My law firm and I, we have intervened to fight them in 8 states. If they sue in more states, we'll fight them in more states. You know, in addition to being the founder of Democracy Docket, I'm also the founder of a law firm. We are litigating more than 60 cases right now involving elections in like 30 states. It's wild how much the Republicans have turned to the courts to try to make it harder for you to be able to vote. And that is not going to decrease, that is going to increase. And they're going to use the federal government, the lawyers at the Department of Justice to litigate against my clients and in cases I'm involved in, the military, the federal law enforcement, monitors. Remember, they sent DOJ monitors to counties in California and New Jersey. Mark my words, we've not heard the last of that. And we're going to see more of it in 2026. So this federal involvement in the voting process is going to be one of the big stories between now and next November. So we cannot become desensitized to it. We can never become used to seeing armed military on the streets of our cities. We can't become desensitized to it for a lot of reasons involving how we treat our fellow human beings, how we treat migrants, how we treat US citizens. But we also can't become immune to it because they want you to become desensitized to it so that when we get to next November, it seems quite normal to have armed military roaming around neighborhoods around polling places. But the big thing Donald Trump is going to try to use the power of the federal government for is my 4th item. He's going to claim the power to count ballots, tabulate results, and certify elections. Now, this is almost dystopian, okay? The Constitution gives states the power to count votes and to certify elections. The House and the Senate rules trigger seating off of state certifications. In the Senate, it is the certification signed by the governor, countersigned by the Secretary of State. In the House, it's certified by the top electoral body or top election official in the state. That's how the House and Senate rules are supposed to work. But Donald Trump is going to try to usurp that. Donald Trump is going to say that he gets to count the votes, that he gets to decide who's certified the winner. Now, if you think I'm being alarmist, just read what Donald Trump has said. Just read his social media posts. Donald Trump has said that he believes that the federal government gets to count the votes and tabulate the results. He has said that the states act as, quote, agents of the federal government when they do that. So in other words, he'd say, yes, the states currently do that, but they're doing that on behalf of the federal government. And then he says, again, his words, not mine, that he is the president, and therefore he speaks for the federal government. Right? So under his logic, the states are his agents, and he gets to decide what votes count and don't count and gets to decide if an election is certified. Now, if this sounds far-fetched to you, go look at what he did in 2020. There was a meeting in the White House on, I believe it was December 16th, 2020. That has been widely reported. People who were in the meeting have given testimony under oath about what happened. And essentially, it was a meeting for Donald Trump to consider whether or not to sign an executive order that does what I just said he will do in 2026 in the state of Georgia in 2020. After the votes were counted by the state of Georgia, he wanted to issue an executive order that would have seized the voting equipment, would have taken control of the ballots, would have sent in federal agents, and would have, by the way, appointed Sidney Powell. Sidney Powell, the now disgraced, disbarred, election-denying lunatic lawyer, would have made her a DOJ special counsel to look into election fraud. Now, why didn't that happen in 2020? It only didn't happen because the White House counsel's office, his own lawyers, said it couldn't happen and that they threatened to resign. And that lawyers at the Department of Justice, his Department of Justice, said it couldn't happen and threatened to resign. Does anyone believe that anyone in the White House now would threaten to resign if Donald Trump does this in 2026? I mean, resign? They'll be leading the charge. Stephen Miller will be like drafting up the papers. Does anyone think Pam Bondi will say, no, Mr. President, you can't do this? I mean, Pam Bondi is doing his bidding in the most grotesque way possible, in the most transparent ways possible, in the most anti-rule of law way possible. She not only wouldn't do this, she would lead the charge. She'd be with Stephen Miller saying, hey, Mr. President, what state do you want us to go to next? What do you want the ballots to total up to? Which ones shouldn't we count? I mean, this is not an independent Department of Justice. They wouldn't even need a special counsel. And if they did, they'd appoint just another Donald Trump former lawyer, like they're doing in U.S. attorneys' offices to prosecute his political opponents. So this is a real threat. This is gonna, the chances of this happening are pretty high. We need to be ready for it, because the way we stop any of these things from happening is by exposing it before it happens. Don't let him do it in the dark of night. Don't let him do it and everyone be surprised. Don't let him do it and people wake up and say, oh my God, how do I react? We need to be reacting in advance. And I'll tell you who's not going to be doing that, the legacy media. I mean, I'm going to get to them at the end of this video, so stay tuned, because you're not going to want to miss that. Number 5 is that we're going to continue to see extreme Republican gerrymandering, and it's actually going to get worse. I know you're thinking, how could it get worse? Oh, it can always get worse. Republicans can always go back to the same well they've been at before and just make them worse. And we're already seeing signs that that's what he has in mind, right? We've seen the pressure he put on Texas, and Texas caved. One of the stories about the Texas cave that I don't think has gotten the play that it needs to, it was reported by Democracy Docket, but frankly, Democracy Docket was the only news outlet that put a reporter in the courtroom, I think, every day of the trial. Maybe there were a right-wing outlet or a local station, but the only national outlet that had someone in the courtroom for all 10 days of the trial challenging the Texas map. I know you're thinking, I didn't even know there was a trial. That's right, because the legacy media didn't tell you there was a trial. They didn't tell you that there's a lawsuit going on to try to block that map as illegal and unconstitutional. No. But anyway, during that trial, what came out is that the map was drawn by a map drawer in Washington, D.C. at the direction of the White House and the RNC, that the Texas legislature had nothing to do with drawing that map. In fact, Texas legislature trial, a number of them testified they had never even seen the map. The hearings they held, they were all sham. They were for show, had no input in the map. The guy who drew the map, the guy in Washington, D.C., he said, I didn't pay any attention to the testimony of the citizens of Texas at those hearings. It was a cruel show that was put on for the national media to buy it hook, line, and sinker, which is exactly what the legacy media did. But here's the thing. The push to gerrymander and to attack minority voting rights in particular has only just begun. Like, we've not seen the last of what is going to happen there. Already, states in the Deep South, like Louisiana, have said that they want to draw new maps for 2026. They are already predicting the demise of the Voting Rights Act. And if that happens, you're going to see a wave of new gerrymandering in all of those states in the Deep South that right now have districts in which Black voters or Hispanic voters can elect their candidate of choice. Fair Fight, the organization started by Stacey Abrams, said that could be as many as 19 districts. The New York Times, much more conservative estimate, said 12. Democracy Docket actually, for what it's worth, puts the number much higher and says it's closer to 30. Let's just, for the sake of simplicity, let's just go with the New York Times number. Okay, the most conservative number, the bare minimum, 12. 12 districts that Republicans could zero out Democrats, zero out minority representation in the South in advance of 2026. That's in addition to what you're seeing in Missouri and in North Carolina and perhaps in Indiana and in Florida, which is going to do gerrymandering, notwithstanding a state constitutional provision that prohibits it. That's just on top of that. So look, we're going to see more extreme gerrymandering by Republicans. We're going to see more desperate gerrymandering by Republicans. And if Democrats don't keep their head in this game, we're going to get shut out for democracy in the midterms. That is what Donald Trump wants. And I am proud of the people of California for standing up against it. I am proud of the legislature in Virginia for saying they are also going to draw a new map. And by the way, Democrats announced that they were going to do a new map about a week or 10 days before the election just took place. At that point, it looked like Democrats were sort of losing altitude in Virginia. Sure, Spanberger was going to win, but the polls in the state house, state legislative races didn't look great. The attorney general candidate had taken on a lot of water over text messages he had sent. Looked like he was going to lose. And then the legislative leaders in Virginia did something really smart, is they made this about redistricting. They made the state house in Virginia elections about redistricting. And Democrats swept. I mean, historically swept. They gained like 13 seats and have like 63 or 64 members in a 100-member body. It's a historic high water mark, for Democrats ever since, Dixiecrats went away. And I think a large measure of it because they told the voters of Virginia, if you do this, if you put us in power, we're going to deliver democracy. And I think that's what we're going to see in Virginia. I'm telling them to go for a 10-1 map. It's 11 seats overall. Right now it's 6-5 Democratic. I think they should do 10-1. I hope they don't compromise to 9-2, but we will have that in an upcoming episode as that process plays out. But look, Republicans, they're going to be more ruthless. We need Democrats in every one of these blue states, Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Illinois and New Jersey and New York. We need it everywhere. Maryland, the damn state president of Maryland doesn't want to do this. Anyway, we need Democrats to do this more places, but we need to be resigned that however many places Democrats will do it, Republicans will outpace us. So we're never going to probably equal parity with them because they are going to keep going. It's not going to be enough, though, for him and for Republicans to simply fight this out in state legislatures. Republicans are going to ask courts to legitimize their actions. That is number 6 on my list. Republicans need judges to bless, to legitimize, to create a permission structure for them to suppress the vote, for them to restrict the vote, and for them to be able to subvert the outcome of elections that they don't like. Republicans know that. Look, I am the walking embodiment for Republicans of the humiliation they have suffered at the hands of judges. I beat them like a drum in 2020 in the aftermath of Donald Trump's defeat. My team and I led a litigation effort that beat Donald Trump 64 of 65 times in the post-election. I've beaten Republicans for decades before that. I mean, you could go back. In 2018, Donald Trump was calling me the Democratic Party's best election stealing lawyer. That was 2018. Okay, that's 2 years before we ever get to the 2020 election. Republicans have been hating on me and the work I do because I've been fighting for you. I've been fighting for voters. I've been fighting for enfranchisement. And they have been running a disenfranchisement playbook for my entire legal career. And so I am, like I said, the walking embodiment of what they hate because I fight hard. And I'm also the embodiment of what they fear, which is that Democrats, when we fight hard, we can win. And so they are trying to emulate this from the other side. They are now the ones going to court. They are now the ones asking judges to set aside laws. They are now the ones who are asking the judiciary to be complicit in their view of democracy. My view of democracy is very clear. Every eligible voter should have the opportunity to cast a ballot and have that vote counted accurately and the results of the election certified. Period. Nothing partisan about that. Every eligible voter should have the ability to vote. Every lawful ballot should be counted. Every election should reflect the will of that electorate and be certified. Republicans can't say any of those things because they don't believe any of those things. And they are trying to enlist the courts into an alternative jurisprudence, right? I've developed a pro-democracy jurisprudence that I'm very proud of, and that my law firm and I, we advocate to courts every day. I preach it. I write about it on the pages of Democracy Docket. If you're not a subscriber, become one now. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, hit the subscribe button. You'll hear me talk about this approach to voting in almost every video. But Republicans need to hijack the courts into the flip side, a darker view. And it all starts with the fact that they now control the Department of Justice, right? The Department of Justice has historically been the law firm for the United States that protects voting rights. That's actually part of why we have a Department of Justice, was to protect the voting rights of citizens. Instead, the Department of Justice now is doing the litigation bidding of the Republican Party, which is a voter suppression litigation position. Let me give you a few examples. I mentioned earlier, they are suing 8 states to get access to sensitive voter data on tens of millions of Americans. They actually want the voter data from all 50 states, so they actually want voter data from hundreds of millions of Americans. And before all said and done, they may sue all 50 states for all I know. They are asking the Supreme Court right now, as you're watching this video, they're asking the US Supreme Court to overturn the Voting Rights Act. That's right. I mean, the Department of Justice's mission is to defend the Voting Rights Act. Like literally, it is their job to defend the Voting Rights Act. And Republican attorneys general and Democratic attorney generals have done so since it was passed in 1965. It has been a bipartisan commitment to defend this law and to maximize this law, to undo the vestiges of racial discrimination in voting, which are still present in our society today. Not this Justice Department. This Justice Department has told the Supreme Court to overturn it. This Department of Justice has told the Supreme Court to overturn a critical pillar of the campaign finance laws. I'm actually arguing that case in the US Supreme Court in early December. I'm arguing the case because the Department of Justice literally said they would no longer defend a law that has been on the books since the 1970s and which the US Supreme Court has twice upheld. But the Department of Justice under Donald Trump, they won't defend the law. So that's why you'll all read about or not see, but hear me in the US Supreme Court in December. And again, we'll have lots of opportunities before then to talk about what that case is about. All of this is going to intensify. It is going to get more aggressive. It's going to get more frequent, and it's going to be much more coordinated. Now, what do I mean by coordinated? Look, there is a network of right-wing organizations, anti-voting groups, political committees of the Republican Party that are very well funded. And they all work together. Pam Bondi knows who they are. Harmeet Dillon, who is the head of the voting section under Pam Bondi, she heads the lawyers who actually do these voter suppression lawsuits. Her former law firm, which still has her name in it, is one of the big law firms bringing cases trying to make it harder to vote in this country. I mean, literally, she's in the government. Her former law firm with her name in it is in the private sector, and they're both basically swimming in the same direction, as is the Republican National Committee, as is an organization that was originally founded by Stephen Miller, as is an organization that has affiliations with Bill Barr, former Republican Attorney General. I mean, for all of the talk that Republicans have about me and, Democratic or liberal billionaires like George Soros or whoever they are in their fever dreams, I would love to have a fraction of the money that the right wing has destroying democracy, to try to protect it. But again, that's a video for another day. Number 7 on my list is one you've heard me talk about before, but it's going to take on new urgency. Political prosecutions are going to increase. I have been talking about the risk of political misuse of the Department of Justice to go after Donald Trump's opponents since before he took office. I have been beating this drum from the beginning because one of the lessons that authoritarians learn is that you can cripple an opposition movement if you criminally prosecute their leaders. You can cripple a political opposition, like candidates, by misusing the criminal investigative powers. We are seeing all of that already. And I hate to say it, but in some sense, I feel like I am not winning this battle of hearts and minds. Sure, people get that Comey is being vindictively prosecuted, and that's wrong. People certainly get that about Tish James. But when I talk about John Bolton, people say, well, but maybe there's evidence. And when I talk about Congresswoman LaMonica MacIver, most of you say, I don't even know who that is. Congresswoman LaMonica MacIver is a Democratic member of Congress from Newark, New Jersey, who did an oversight inspection of an ICE facility in her district, which, by the way, federal law says that she has the right to do on an unannounced basis and that ICE cannot interfere with her at all. Well, not only did the federal government interfere with this inspection, but they then criminally indicted her. Alina Habba, one of the lawyers for Donald Trump. She used to be a garage parking company general counsel and then became one of Donald Trump's personal lawyers. And now she's like the acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey, although perhaps illegally acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey. Who the hell knows what's going on there? But anyway, they indicted LaMonica MacIver, and that case is going forward. And I talk about this case all the time. Because if ever there was a clearer instance of going after a Democratic elected official to try to intimidate all Democratic elected officials, it would be the MacIver case. Now, that's, again, not to say that that's not true also in the Comey case and the Tish James case, but it's also true in the Bolton case that I get a lot of pushback on. And it's true in many, many more cases to come. Remember his Dear Pam social media post that was supposed to be a direct message that he posted publicly? It listed Tish James. It listed James Comey, but it also listed a current Democratic U.S. Senator. Now, we haven't seen anything happen there yet, and I hope it never does. But Donald Trump is going to use the criminal process. He's going to use criminal investigations to go after his political opponents. He targets them. He targets Democrats. He targets candidates. He targets Democratic lawyers like me. And he does it because he thinks that if he does that, it will make it harder for us to mount an opposition to him, both at an intellectual level, an ideological level, a movement level, but also at an electoral level. And so as we head towards 2026, we're going to see more of it. We're going to see a lot more of it. And we all need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to react the way we need to be reacting today, which is to out of the box say it's wrong. Not to buy into the nonsense of, well, was there a career prosecutor on the indictment? Well, when was the investigation begun? Well, what was it say in the indictment? Set all that aside. Why the fuck do you trust anything out of this Department of Justice? I don't care who the prosecutor is. Why the hell do you think that what they put in indictments is true? Like, what about this administration has earned your trust that they are acting in good faith? So we need to not give them that as we head towards the 2026 midterm elections. All right, I promised you that I was going to get back to legacy media. And so this is number 8, the last thing that I expect as we head towards 2026. And that is that the legacy media will fail us. Now, in some ways, I should just say the legacy media will continue to fail us because the legacy media has been failing us. It has been failing us for a very long time. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, it has been failing us for a very long time. It has become very obvious that it is failing us in the second Trump administration because it has moved from sort of both sidesism, whataboutism, to something much more pernicious. It is now moved from what I call the victim phase to the capitulation phase to what I now call the collaborator phase. Why do I distinguish between those three? Well, the victim is, media companies going about its business. Donald Trump comes and threatens them. They're a victim. If they capitulate, they're not really a victim anymore, right? They're now something more than a victim. Now they've capitulated. But at some point, it goes from capitulation to actually collaboration, where the media companies say, you know what, there's actually something in this for us, right? This actually isn't a bad thing. We can make this a good thing, right? We can sort of partner with the administration and we all win. The only people who lose are you, the viewers, are the American people, are Democrats. They lose, and democracy loses. And that's the cynical phase we are in right now, in which legacy media outlets are not passively being victims, and they're not even capitulating. They're actually going a step further. Go read the transcript. Go read the transcript of what Donald Trump said to 60 Minutes. I think if you read the transcript, I think Donald Trump thinks that they're in it together. I mean, he praises the new editor. He praises the new owners. He tells them he's not trying to embarrass them. He says he'd prefer a question not be asked. He's giving some stage direction there. And look, I'm not saying that Norah O'Donnell or any of the people at 60 Minutes, that they knowingly are intentionally taking the stage direction. I just think that they know what's going on here, which is that if Donald Trump ended that video interview, that recording, and went on Truth Social and said, I was just ambushed by fake media, CBS News, and they should never get anything approved again before the FCC, I think that they all just knew that they'd be held to pay. Their new owners would be unhappy. Their bosses would be unhappy. There are a lot of layoffs going on in legacy media. Like who wants to be in that crossfire? So they didn't have to make an agreement. They just knew that, like, at the end of the day, they were better off with a happy Donald Trump than an unhappy Donald Trump. And I think that comes through. And I'm picking on CBS News only because they did the 60 Minutes interview, which, 60 Minutes, for those of you who don't remember, used to be the most fearsome interview on television. Like, these were the most prepared, hardest questions, hardball. They didn't care who they offended. I just don't think you can watch that interview and think that's what happened. And of course, they also paid $16 million to settle the bogus case. And they also ended the Colbert show. But I could pick on Disney, if you prefer. We could talk about what ABC's done to capitulate, and perhaps more to collaborate. We could talk about the fact that Comcast, who owns NBC, Comcast got a big check to rip down the part of the White House, bulldoze it, and build a new ballroom for Donald Trump. We could talk about the Washington Post and Jeff Bezos. We could talk about CNN. What the hell, I don't even understand what CNN's done other than make itself not offensive to Donald Trump. I mean, no one's watching CNN. But here's the thing. Focusing on individual outlets misses the big story, which is they're not going to save us. They're not going to save democracy. That's not the business they're in. They really don't care if democracy dies, and if it dies, whether it's light out or it's dark out. What they care about is making money, and they care about making money on businesses that frankly have nothing to do with the news. Jeff Bezos doesn't make his money at the Washington Post. Paramount doesn't make its money at CBS. Disney doesn't make its money at ABC. Comcast doesn't make its money on the NBC Nightly News. And Lord knows Warner Brothers is not making its money on CNN. So for them, they're maximizing other businesses, and the news, they're just trying to go along and get along with an administration that cares a lot about what their news divisions say. But it's bad for democracy. And so this last one about the legacy media failing us, we can't do without media. Like, we can't have an effective opposition to Donald Trump without media. We can't have a functioning democracy without media. So look, I started Democracy Docket in 2020 to be a leading source of news information and analysis about what's happening to democracy, with a particular focus on elections and voting in court. And since then, it has grown dramatically because people like you support it. It is now 21 people. We have offices in Washington, D.C. and in the New York City area. We cover cases, we cover issues, hearings that legacy media doesn't. We cover issues that get ignored. We put out newsletters. We do the videos like this, but we rely on your support. We rely on you subscribing for free. And if you're able to, paying $10 a month to get some additional premium content, but also to make the Democracy Docket enterprise work. We're not the only ones. I could list a bunch of others that I hope you support. The Bulwark is doing great and important pro-democracy work. The Contrarian is doing really important pro-democracy work. Pod Save America, I think they do really important content as well. Down Ballot, one you've probably not heard of, a smaller one that focuses on state and local elections. Status, Oliver Darcy's newsletter that focuses on the media itself. I learn a lot from that. I could go on and on about different independent media sources. And whether it's Democracy Docket or it's one of the others, I really encourage you to support them with your time, with your attention, and if you can, with your dollars. If you can't afford it, it's fine. Every one of the ones I just listed has free options as well. But we're not going to survive this time and get through the next year and all those 8 challenges without us having a vibrant community of people who support each other. And part of that is having an independent media infrastructure that is able to take on the holes that have been left by some of what legacy media has abandoned, some of what legacy media never did, and also what's going on the right wing and their media structures, which are much larger, better funded, and have more reach. So I hope you do that. I hope you also like this video. I hope you share this video with your friends. And I hope you leave a comment. You know, I do read the comments because it tells me what it is that's on your mind, what I'm saying that connects, what it is that I could do better. And I take that to heart. So please do me a favor, like the video if you liked it. Share the video if you think there's someone in your life who could benefit from it. And either way, leave me a comment and let me know what you think. Democracy survived the 2025 election. It did more than survive. It kicked ass. And we should feel really good about that. Nothing in this episode should leave you to feel any less good about the results that happened across the country. But it should also make you more intent, more focused, more committed than ever before to make sure that we have the same results, that we have free and fair elections in 2026. What happened in these elections is proof that if we all stand up for democracy, if we all vote, we can make a difference. We can defeat authoritarianism. We can bring in a new era of a pro-democracy movement and agenda. And so please, do that along with me. Do that along with everyone else who is in this fight. And thanks. I'll see you next time.